drives a taxi cab at night in New York, which is the worst time you can do it. It's sort of a kind of a religious film in the sense that it explodes into great violence, repression into violence, almost like a cleansing, you know?
It's 1975 and Martin Scorsese is pacing around in his New York apartment, furious. He's just been told by studio executives that they want to cut down the climactic shootout in Taxi Driver, calling it too violent and too graphic. But for Scorsese, this wasn't just a movie, this was his art, his vision, his soul on celluloid. So what does he do? According to legend, Scorsese snapped, grabbed a handgun, stormed into the studio offices and threatened the executives, saying, "If you touch a single frame on my film, I'll shoot you and then I'll shoot myself." The room went silent. The execs, terrified, Scorsese, dead serious. In the end, the studio didn't cut the scene, though they made him desaturate the blood to get it past the censors. That moment became the stuff of Hollywood legend, symbolising the ultimate clash between creative geniuses and corporate control. We lived through the remake era when we were young, and we couldn't think it could get any worse, but now we're in the universe and franchise era where you don't even get a remake, you just get endless continuations of the same universe and same host of characters, and it all has the same tone, which is impressive that Marvel was able to keep the same tone. Even when they got big name directors to make certain films, they weren't allowed to do the action sequences, they had to fit that tone, they could barely put their own flavour into it. It just makes it a bit pointless to even attract those big names. They've taken an art form and it's gone from the 70s era where things went too far. You know, you had Michael Cimino losing his mind, completely bankrupting United Artists, using the film's own budget to hire outside security staff to keep the studio heads out of the editing suite. You can see why they wanted to take control and start churning out the kind of shit we got in the 80s, which I loved, but you know, you didn't get very many Deer Hunters or Godfathers. They've become too good at it. It's too much of a product now. In 1984, Lynch signed on to direct Dune, and the aim was to craft a dark, sprawling sci-fi epic in his own bizarre, trippy style. But instead of creative freedom, he walked into a studio clusterfuck. His original cut, nearly 3 hours, complex, bizarre, unsettling, basically exactly what you want from a David Lynch film. But Universal wanted something marketable. They hacked it down to 2 hours, forced reshoots, slapped on voiceovers to explain the things that Lynch never wanted explained. And the final film was a mess. Lynch hated it. Fans of the books hated it, and the mainstream audiences hated it. The film was a flop. And when the extended TV version aired, he scrubbed his name from the credits, using Alan Smithee in its place. He even credited the script to Judas Booth. Before Dune, George Lucas offered Lynch the chance to direct Return of the Jedi. Lynch turned it down flat. He didn't want to play in someone else's sandbox. But despite avoiding the Ewoks, he somehow ended up in an even worse situation. After that disaster, Lynch held his middle finger up to big studios for the rest of his career. He went back to smaller projects where he could do things his way. The result? Blue Velvet, Twin Peaks, Wild at Heart, Mulholland Drive. The kind of films that everyone remembers. No compromises, just Lynch.
You gonna try to do a close-up on Candy still? Or do you... If you want to cut the time down.
What is this with everybody? What is it? Really?
Only me. It's
Why?
my fault.
I'm serious. Fucking A, man. It drives me nuts. Who gives a fucking shit how long a scene is?
Obviously, rest in peace, David Lynch.
Oh, fuck yeah.
The master. There's a specific clip of him circulating. He's in his chair, he's kind of doing a shot, and he's got the camera there in front of him. One of the producers or someone on set has come along and said, "Oh, you need to cut this down because it's taking too long." And he's just going absolutely ballistic, going, "I don't fucking cut my shots for anyone. Like, the studios, the producers can go fuck themselves. This is my film." Studios, let's not mess about here. Their vision will basically be, what's going to make us, the studio, the most money? Do people want to sit here and watch 9-minute, 10-minute long shots, or are they going to get bored and not go to the film? The power struggle between the directors and the studios. But there will be certain directors in this world that basically are so big that they can beat them. Like, do you think Spielberg big enough to beat a studio?
I mean, there's a reason you see his own producer credits on his own films.
Yeah, true.
Peter Jackson is one where he's interesting, where his talent nearly was being a producer more than a director, even though he's a very good director. Lord of the Rings came out so well because he was so fantastic at organising and keeping a level of continuity and understanding special effects and what he could get away with. As amazing as Lord of the Rings was, that was an under-budget film for what he delivered. It was amazing. If you have enough clout, if you have a proven track record, if your name is being used as top billing above a lot of the stars, like Quentin Tarantino, like he's not in small at the end after Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio. He's at the start. He's at the front. He's like, you know, he used to get a film would come out and it would say Quentin Tarantino introduces.
Yeah.
If he liked a film, like that's how big his clout was. Spielberg, obviously, he does what he wants. And interestingly, it is nearly like the world's been turned upside down with the streaming giants because they don't have to worry about making money and they're chasing clout. They want credibility. They're desperate for a few Oscar nominations. So they're going to Martin Scorsese and say, hey, what was that dream project you wanted to do? It's a 200 million budget, 4-hour film about a gangster growing old. Yeah, fuck it, we'll do that. We don't even want to see the final cut. Do whatever you want. So you're getting this weird topsy-turvy world where it's nearly like the opposite of the way a normal studio should act, or does act anyway. But the thing with studios as well is, like you said, the David Lynch example. Now, if you're producing a David Lynch film, if it was on Indeed or LinkedIn, don't talk to David Lynch would be the first line.
Yeah.
And the rest of it is like, make sure everyone's there on time, everyone's getting paid, the food's ready. If they need a crane shot that day, the crane needs to be there and organised and everyone needs to know what they're doing. Be the in-between between him and the actual studio. But it is that weird thing where you're spending millions to basically intellectually masturbate if you're making like a crazy artistic film to the point of the kind of stuff David Lynch has come out with. And don't get me wrong, I'm delighted that that happens. But, you know, those millions aren't coming out of nowhere. That is from the pockets and they got to make a profit eventually, or hopefully make a profit. But I don't think it's fair to say studios are always only thinking about profits, and not in a they care about the art form way. It's kind of like Warner Brothers had that special deal with Stanley Kubrick. And now Kubrick's films pretty much always did make money, to be fair, but it wasn't crazy money. Say, I'm pulling one out of my ass, but Full Metal Jacket, I bet that made a lot of money. I bet it cost quite a lot of money to make. Maybe it doubled its money, tripled its money, which sounds great in any business, but studios are used to hoping a film is going to make 10 times back its money. That's kind of the gamble that they take. And they know they're going to have a couple of duds, but they can't have many duds. But Warner Brothers, even if he wasn't making money, I don't think they would have ever got rid of that deal where Kubrick basically got to do whatever he wanted, because it was prestige. If Stanley Kubrick's making a film and people are going to go see that and keep watching it for decades and decades on into the future, he wanted that Warner Brothers logo up there, bang, associating that with his mind. He was paying for the prestige, even if it would lose money, even if they're doing a 2-year shoot for Eyes Wide Shut. He's just sitting in a room with 6 crew doing Steadicam shots of Nicole Kidman scissoring with Tom Cruise for 2 years. Like, what is going on here? But you accept it because his madness comes with this incredible prestige. And, you know, I'm sure some of them are movie fans themselves. When the streaming giants first started throwing directors bones and saying, do whatever you want. I remember Bill Burr was doing his animation, listening to his podcast, and he was saying he couldn't believe it. Like, the notes are always, go further, don't hold back, go crazy, do whatever you want. But is that always the best thing? Like, it's nearly like, you know, when you're a kid and you get an essay, and when the essay has no title that they give you, you're sitting there chewing your pencil for 2 minutes because you're like, fuck, what do I write about? Maybe they need some reining in. Maybe they need a bit of managing sometimes. I don't know that there's not a talent to being a studio exec.
Say you had already made a small film. It's done well enough that studios are looking to finance your next picture. You hit the big time. What studio would you pick to make your breakout film? Now, the obvious one for me, and it's going to be really obvious, I'm sorry if it is, but it's just a fact, I would go for A24. Yeah,
A24 is fucking incredible these days. Interesting business model they have where they do commercial fishing of the art house scene. Instead of being like, we'll bank on $40 million budget for one film and we'll try and get at least a B-list big name actor to throw in it so we can fucking have his face in all the trailers and the posters. Instead of that, let's break up that budget to 10 lots of about 4 million and throw it at 10 art house directors. 6 will just sort of come and go and no one will care. 1 or 2 will get a big buzz, and every now and then you'll get Hereditary or The Substance, maybe even Oscar winning like in Moonlight. And you can tell they let you do whatever the fuck you want, to an extent. I mean, you never know, but I get the feeling that it's kind of like in football where Dortmund, you know, a club with prestige, but you can attract the best young talent because they know you'll give them minutes, develop them, and then let them go for a big price once the big boys come along.
Universal.
So it's probably the same thing where, like, if you're a young, talented director who really wants to make a movie and someone's like, listen, you've never even done anything before, but here's 4 million. We like your script. We've seen a few of your short films and music videos or whatever. Have a go mental. And do you know what? Even if it flops, that's okay. Because Hereditary, I think, made 100 mil. That's not a big splash in filmmaking terms. But if all your budgets for all your films that year was about 40, 50 mil, and one of them has pretty much kept you solvent, then happy days. The 80s comes and we get Ferris Bueller's Day Off and fucking Flashdance and all that shit, which are great, but it was clearly a backlash. Then you had the cynical 90s, which was a complete backlash to the 80s, where it was nearly anti-film. Even the studios were coming out with fairly big budget, independent style films. American Beauty with old Kevin Rapey was essentially a medium budget Hollywood big studio movie cosplaying as a small indie. Because that wasn't a small film, not on a small budget, but it had all the flavour and feelings and look and aesthetic and style of those kind of indie films from the era. It nearly felt like it was going a bit 70s again, like the producers was kind of taking the reins off, being like, this is selling, this is working, people don't want that popcorn horse shit at the minute. And then the 2000s came round and it was remake time, and it felt like it just went back round the other way. Studios had complete control, and now we're in this franchise era where it's just a product. They don't even need to squeeze the juice out of it because they're squeezing it out and it's never even going in your mouth, it's going into a bucket and they're just pouring it around the back again. You can't even accuse them of recycling anymore because they're just expanding these universes and franchises, but it's fucking boring and it's too much.
We said Steven Spielberg as an example, and if he has to produce his own stuff, the battle will never be won by because he is probably, I'd say, one of the biggest directors ever, if not possibly the biggest director ever. Did you see The Fabelmans?
Nah, it's one of those things, kind of like we're saying with studio relationships. I could tell that was one of those, I'll come out of an Alien film next time.
Yeah.
Just let me make this fucking film that's not going to make any money.
I kind of liked it because it was like a homage to his love to cinema, and it was like Steven Spielberg's origin story. Like, we're making him into a superhero. But anyway, David Lynch is in it as a director. And obviously there's a famous story that you always repeat about him turning up to the studios.
Spielberg always used to tell this story of how he made his big break in the business. He knew where the Paramount lot is and he was walking around it, and one day he just saw an open window, so he went inside and it was an empty desk that no one was using, so he just kept turning up there and like helping out and getting to know people, and eventually they realised, but they were like, do you know what, kid, you've got gumption, you got a job. And it turned out that was a big lie, and he just had an uncle or something in the industry.
Well, I think he wrote them and he kept writing them letters. In the end, they were just like, for fuck's sake, this kid's doing my head in. Like, just bring him along to make teas. And David Lynch plays this director that kind of mentors Spielberg when he's at the studios. The name escapes me, it's pissing me off. He was one of the most famous directors of the time working at the studios, who had directed a bunch of John Wayne westerns. And it's kind of touching and poignant that David Lynch's last words on screen as Spielberg's leaving the office, he's there with a cigar and he just says, go get it, kid.
David Lynch, man, what a gangster. We were talking about that The Fabelmans was blatantly, let me make this and I'll make a big blockbuster next. But it's funny where you get directors that formulated those sort of relationships. Like, one is Clint Eastwood, where he basically had a one for you, one for me deal with the studio, where he would direct a bigger budget film that would commercially do well, something easier to sell, and then he would get to do a film for himself that probably was much more risky, much more less likely that it would make its budget back or be a hit. But even Clint Eastwood's ironclad relationship with Warner Brothers hit a bump in the end after his 2021 film Cry Macho flopped at the box office. Warner Brothers Discovery's new CEO reportedly questioned why the film was even greenlit. The answer was loyalty. It was Eastwood. He's the kind of name that can actually get a studio to throw millions into a project they know is going to be commercial dog shit. These days in Hollywood, even legends aren't immune.
My next guest directed a film called Halloween that became the most successful independent production in motion picture history. His latest film, about to open, is called The Thing. Please welcome John Carpenter. Hello, John. How are you? Have a seat, if you will, sir. You prefer doing an independent film, I would guess, huh?
Well, I just started making films with big studios, with Universal, and I kind of like it. It's fun.
Yeah, they treating you well? Because
Very well.
I read that you mentioned that sometimes a motion picture company, or a big one, would be kind of not the most fun to work with.
I was worried when I went in because I thought maybe they'd take away control of the movie from me. I think that's what every director wants, is control of his film.
John Carpenter, legendary director, fucking incredible, so many amazing films. But a lot of his most beloved films today, and the films you'd associate as some of his best, kind of ruined his career and were his biggest flops. Big Trouble in Little China, and the other was The Thing. Fucking incredible films, both tanked and did terrible critically, both probably ahead of its time, especially Big Trouble in Little China. That would make a lot more sense today than it would have back in the 80s. But both those films really tanked his career. After the box office flop of Big Trouble in Little China in 1986, most directors would have been scrambling to get back into Hollywood's good graces. But John Carpenter, instead of bending to the studio's demands, made a bold move. He partnered with Alive Films, a smaller production company that offered him something priceless: total creative control. No annoying studio execs poking their nose in where it doesn't belong. But the catch was his budgets were slashed to the bone, never topping more than $3 million during their time working together. But Carpenter didn't give a shit. It wasn't a limitation, to him it was a challenge. With these shoestring budgets, Carpenter crafted Prince of Darkness in 1987 and They Live in 1988. Films that didn't just do okay in the box office, but exploded into cult classics. These movies were raw, unfiltered, and exactly how he wanted. Pure Carpenter. And in many ways saw a return in style to his early career, and made fans of his earlier films very, very happy. But think about the films of his you love. I wouldn't put Prince of Darkness necessarily lower than Big Trouble in Little China. If I had to put them up against each other, I guess I would say Big Trouble in Little China is better. But I don't know. I love Prince of Darkness. But that was one of the $2 million budget ones. And when you play through what that film was like, it makes sense. Like, you can actually see, yeah, it's all in one location. Not all that much really happens. You can see how it was a $2 million budget film. But I didn't watch it be like, this is cheap. I watched it like, fucking John Carpenter is on his A game here. This is great. Another one, In the Mouth of Madness. Tiny budget, brilliant film. They Live. Another one. Incredible film. Some of his best. So I do wonder sometimes, you think about like Spielberg. He can do whatever he wants. Certainly for the past 20 years, he can do whatever he wants. CGI now means his imagination, he can do anything. He doesn't have to be limited by practical effects and what he can show or pull out of his brain. But his films have been shite during that time in comparison. Now, to be fair, it might be because he's old. Most artists decline in quality over time. Their work declines. That's just the norm. Very few people are Martin Scorsese. But you do wonder, is the fact maybe one of the reasons why Martin Scorsese is still so good, that even though he gets his big budget nowadays, he's never truly been a hit maker. He probably still struggles to get films funded a lot of the time. There's still probably that fear and that hunger and that, I haven't arrived. Even though I'm Martin Scorsese, everyone loves me. Like, I still have to fucking really work my arse off to come up with a good film and get it made and get it on paper and convince people. To an extent, as much as he would. So sometimes maybe the limitations that a studio might put on a director is helpful in some weird, unexpected way. Maybe the budget limitations, we can't do that, that's too expensive. You can't hire this actress, you got to use this bitch because she's good looking and she sucked the studio head's dick. Not even what it does to the film, but what it does to the director.
Keeps him in check.
Well, I don't even say keeps him in check. Keeps him fucking fiery. Keeps him thinking like it's me versus them. Keeps him having to be fucking creative. You know, he's not the United States and UK bowling into Afghanistan with air conditioning and their tanks and a KFC back at the base. You're the Viet Cong running down tunnels, you know. He's like Martin Sheen saying, I'm out here in this bed on leave and Charlie's still out there in the jungle staying tough. Maybe that does help in some weird sort of way.
I was somehow fortunate enough to do exactly what I wanted with a major studio, with a major star in the Hollywood system. I'm going to do it my way.
Fresh off his Oscar-winning success with The Deer Hunter, arguably the greatest Vietnam War film, Michael Cimino felt untouchable. United Artists had given him carte blanche to direct Heaven's Gate, a sprawling Western epic. But what started as a passion project spiraled into complete chaos. Cimino's obsession with perfection led to endless reshoots, delays and ballooning budgets that skyrocketed from 11 million to an eye-watering 44 million, which doesn't sound like shit now, but was crazy numbers at the time. is arguably the biggest example of self-indulgence in movie history, but probably in any industry. When Heaven's Gate finally hit theatres, it continued to be a disaster. Critics savaged it. Mainstream audiences had zero interest, and the film pulled in a pathetic 3.5 mil. And the fallout was immediate. United Artists, once was one of the most respected studios in Hollywood, went bust and got sold off to MGM. But Heaven's Gate did more than bankrupt the studio, it killed the director-driven era of the 1970s, when filmmakers had freedom to take big risks. Studios tightened their grip, and the age of unchecked creative control was over.